Kids, in 2026, Christopher Nolan, one of the best filmmakers currently working today, returns to the cinemas with his newest movie titled The Odyssey. And look, if you don't know who Christopher Nolan is by name, you certainly know his work. He has made such movies as the Dark Knight trilogy. His latest movie was Oppenheimer. He's done Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk. I mean, this guy is one of the premier filmmakers working today, and when a movie of his is coming out, it is truly an event, kind of akin to something like Star Wars or Marvel. I mean, these take the movie scene by storm. They're modern day blockbusters, essentially, because he's one of the best to do it, both in terms of writing, directing, casting, you name it. This guy just hits home run after home run. Well, leading up to the release of the Odyssey, I have decided to go back and rewatch most of his filmography. And I say most of it because there are some films I'm going to omit from my rewatch schedule. Technically, Christopher Nolan's first movie was a rather kind of short film. I believe one that just came out to being over an hour in length. I think it was like 70 minutes long or something, and it was shot in black and white. And it's called Following. And I have not seen that before because, again, it's it did have a theatrical release, so I guess it was technically a real movie. But again, when you think of a standard movie, you think of something around 90 minutes to 2 hours. This comes out to around 70. And when I was learning about Christopher Nolan, people told me that his first movie was Memento. Then it goes on from Memento to Insomnia to The Prestige, I think, to Batman Begins, so on and so forth. And that's how it follows. People don't consider Following to be part of his filmography because, again, it really was him cutting his teeth as a really young filmmaker, whereas Memento was kind of his first big budget studio back type movie. And so I'm not going to be reviewing Following for this catalog of reviews I'm going to do. So I'm going to watch movies in Christopher Nolan's filmography. I'm going to record segments over the course of my watch of them. And so by the time that you kids are listening to this full video, I will have reviewed several of his movies over the course of several weeks. And I'll compress it down into this podcast episode that you are listening to right now. But as I said, I'm not going to be recording a review for Following. And in addition to that, I'm also not going to do a review of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. And that might shock some people because I love Batman and DC stuff and comic book stuff. But, like the Dark Knight trilogy, it does stand apart from the stuff that he's previously made. Like he is a Christopher Nolan is a prestige filmmaker again. He makes really depth, high concept movies. And the Dark Knight trilogy is absolutely, in depth and is also high concept as well. They're much more kind of crime dramas with Batman attached to them as opposed to being outright Batman films. But, you know, for the sake of me going through his catalog, you know, he has all these other incredible drama pieces, and then he has kind of his more superhero comic book stuff, which again, I'm not knocking it because the Dark Knight trilogy is one of the best trilogies pretty much in film, period. And you could argue that, The Dark Knight is perhaps one of the best crime movies ever made, just period. But I think I'll save the Dark Knight trilogy for perhaps a more in-depth analysis on its own. I could see myself doing a review of each individual movie, or I could see myself doing a review or an analysis of that whole trilogy. I'm not saying I will do that. I'm not like, promising or teasing that I'm going to do that. But I do think that the Dark Knight trilogy does deserve its kind of own special treatment apart from Christopher Nolan's overall catalog. And so, kids, I'm going to be watching and reviewing for this podcast episode a lot of Christopher Nolan's catalog, minus Following and minus the Dark Knight trilogy. And that means, kids, that I'm going to start with, as I said, what was considered to be kind of his first forte into premiere filmmaking with a bigger budget and a studio backing him, this being 2000's Memento. And I got to be honest, kids, despite me being such a big Christopher Nolan fan, I had not seen Memento up until the time of this review. And so by the time you are listening to this podcast episode, when I recorded this segment, I have just gotten done seeing Memento for the first time ever. And I'll say this: I liked it. I think I did not love it. I did not think it was bad, but I like my problems with the movie are that like again, it's incredibly dense and you can see young Christopher Nolan, throughout this movie because Christopher Nolan, he loves to do things with time and have really in-depth and intricate plots as well. I mean, you look at Inception, like that movie has to do with dreaming, but not just like he takes it into like a scientific based level where it's like you're literally evaluating like consciousness, and so that's a really in-depth look at that kind of concept as well. You look at something like Interstellar, which, it's not big and bombastic like Star Wars. Interstellar is a really personal drama on like humanity like exploring space out of like desperation, and it's also really in depth as well because that has to do with, you know, these big, you know, physics and stuff that's like really hard to understand and like, like talking about time and gravity and stuff like that. Then you look at Tenet, which also has to do with like time as well, but that's like inverting time, not necessarily time travel, but like how to like reverse the flow of time and how do you interact with time. I mean, Christopher Nolan he loves to make thinking films, and so much so that when you finish a Christopher Nolan film, you almost feel a little smarter, you almost feel a little more educated on the subject because it's such a treat to digest them. Whereas Star Wars is like beer, Interstellar is wine, for example, when it comes to sci-fi. And so with Memento, again, this being kind of his first real legitimate film, you can see the budding nature of him wanting to take these concepts and make them big and deep and complex. And Memento, at least for myself, it kind of gets lost in that. Again, you can totally see this is going to sound terrible, but I mean this as a compliment. You can see the rookie in Christopher Nolan, the rookie filmmaker. And I say that with praise because you can see him again starting out with everything. He gets a little more money, he gets some better cameras, he gets some better actors, so on and so forth. And with Memento, it's such an interesting movie because this movie tells two chronological paths. One of them is told chronologically, just like any other movie, going, point one, two, three, and beats ABC. Then you have the other half of the movie, the other portion of the movie, told in reverse chronological order, where you're seeing stuff literally told in reverse as well. And there's also really interesting techniques utilizing color. So, one path, one plot system that you're following throughout this movie is in black and white, the other is in color, And so, as you're swapping between literally different chronological periods in the movie, you're also swapping different color schemes as well. I mean, this film is an absolute smorgasbord. And if you don't know what Memento is, I'll give you the elevator pitch. And I'm sorry that I've kind of buried this throughout this entire conversation, but essentially, the elevator pitch of Memento is that there's this guy who has this kind of rare form of amnesia. He doesn't say it's amnesia. In fact, he goes so far as to say it's not amnesia. It's something, different. But essentially, this guy that we follow, played by Guy Pearce, his name is Leonard. He can't make any new memories. He can't. He can remember stuff from a certain point backwards, but he can't remember anything new. And so throughout the movie, you know, he will talk to someone about something. Say he talks to a guy named, Phil about basketball or whatever. Then 10 minutes later, he could see Phil again and he won't remember meeting Phil. He won't remember talking to Phil. He won't remember what they talked about, so on and so forth. And so he himself has this, again, has this kind of a permanent memory lapse that's affecting him in literally his day-to-day life. He can't develop long-lasting relationships, and he can't remember anything about himself beyond a certain point. He essentially describes it as the feeling you have when you first wake up and you're coming into the world and you're like, where am I? What time is it? And we can make sense of it. It's like, where am I? Okay, we're in our bedroom. What time is it? Okay, it's this time, which means I have so much time until I need to get to work, or so on and so forth. Whereas for him, he just wakes up and he's like, where am I? I don't know why I'm here. Who am I? What am I doing here? What am I supposed to be doing? What am I not supposed to be doing? I mean, this guy is going around the block mentally, so on and so forth. And throughout this movie, he is trying to solve the murder of his wife. And so for him to literally keep the facts straight, not only for who he is as a person, but also for the facts that he has developed and acquired over the course of his exploration and research into the murder of his wife, he's literally writing himself notes. And he's also taking Polaroid pictures and he's writing on the back Polaroids and so on and so forth. He's leaving pieces, he's leaving mementos for him to refer to when he finds out that his memory has, it's failing him. It's been completely, you know, uh, you know, he's relapsed. So, in a way for his, mentally speaking. But this goes beyond just taking notes and pictures as well. When there's stuff that's really, really important as well, you discover that he has tattooed information on his body. And so, like, on his forearm, he'll have something that's like, these are the facts. He's like, you can trust so and so, you can't trust so and so. Then on the other arm, so and so drives this car, so and so, hates this food or whatever, and he'll have it across his legs and his stomach and his chest. And so again, the feeling that he describes is like when you're first waking up and you're like, where am I? When he wakes up and he's all delusional and delirious and he's trying to get his bearings about himself, he steps into the mirror and he sees all this ink across his body and he's like, it's like he's rediscovering everything for the first time. It's a really devastating movie because he's always getting snapped back to reality about, oh, that's right, I'm this guy, my wife is dead, I'm trying to solve her murder. And the last thing I left off on was that my prime suspect is John Smith, then there you go. And it's really dense and it's a really cool idea for a movie and they play it out in really interesting ways. But I'll say this as a finished total product and from an entertainment value level as well. I don't know if I got this movie. And maybe it's because I've only seen it once. And like I said, Christopher Nolan loves to take a deep dive into everything. But like, this movie was so complex. I was kind of like, I, I, I don't know if I was confused, but like, it felt overly busy. Some of the stuff in this movie just felt flat out unnecessary. I'll say this though, this thing lives and dies by its editing because again, you're working with black and white colored film. You're working with colored film, so literally, in full color with, reds and blues and greens and all that stuff. And then you're also working with two chronological time frames to work in as well, where you have one playing forward and one playing backwards as well. I mean, you could easily get lost in the editing of it all just from a literal presentation way about having to deal with all these different timelines and so on and so forth. I never got lost in terms of timelines. I understood where we were when things were happening. I got lost just from like a literal like plot development position where I'm like, okay, like I know why he's doing this, but like, how is that going to impact things? And like, okay, then the revelation happens, and I'm like, okay, so that did reveal that, but like, also like, why? Like, it just felt really busy. If it's really intricate to the point though where it's kind of like monotonous. I'll say this though, I could easily see myself having a different opinion of this after a second or third watch. I think now that I'm more so that I've got my feet wet with it, I kind of know what to expect. I'm like, okay, that's right. This part sets up this, which then gets paid off at this point, which then refers back to the thing that happened previously. I mean this both as a compliment and also as like a slight against the movie. I think Christopher Nolan wanted the audience to feel like the literal protagonist in the movie. I think he wanted the audience to feel like we know some things, but not all things. And we can't really remember everything correctly, but we know what we know type stuff. Like it's a really interesting case study for watching and digesting a movie because like you're kind of working with it as this information's being presented to you. However, like if you don't want that experience, then don't watch this movie. If you don't want to work for the plot, you know, don't watch this. But if you want to have a little bit of a mind game on your own, like this can be kind of a mental challenge, I'll say. Not again, it's it's not it's not impossible to follow. Like I did follow it and I understood what they were doing, but like I don't know, just at some points I think it could have been a little more streamlined. And I'll say this too, the movie's not incredibly long, but it felt long. Like it felt like we were just kind of meandering and going through the paces. But like again, look, Christopher Nolan is a Hall of Fame filmmaker. He'll make stuff, you know, I could never make a movie this intricate and have it be as coherent as this was. I'm just saying that I felt it could have been a little tighter overall. But for someone who was introduced to Christopher Nolan through movies like Inception and the Dark Knight trilogy, to go back and to literally see one of his more earlier works and to see kind of the first steps into what he will be more so known for, which again is stuff that's in depth, has to do with time and stuff like that. Like to see him already have that fascination with those concepts in one of his first films was really fun. And so if you have not seen Memento, I do recommend it. I do. I'm just saying you know, it's one of those movies where like you need to put your phone down, draw the shades type stuff, sit in like a nice dark room and just really focus on it. Because if you don't focus on it, you're gonna get lost in it. But like if you really sit down and you're like, okay, I'm gonna digest this movie, and here we go, then I think you'll enjoy it. But yeah, so yeah, Memento, good, not great. I think I'll like it more the next time I see it, but like it is a bit of a meal when it comes to an overall movie. And yeah, sometimes entertainment shouldn't always feel like work, but sometimes when you work for something, you will feel more rewarded at the end for having done said work. So your mileage may vary when you watch Memento, but yes, kids, this is going to be a compilation episode of the Far Out Podcast that again is going to review almost all of Christopher Nolan's movies, minus Following and the Dark Knight trilogy. And so, kids, this will end this portion of the podcast where I have talked about Memento. Then I will continue onward with Nolan's filmography. But again, kids, by the time that this is out, by the time you are listening to it, yes, you kids, the listener, it'll all be compacted and compressed into one singular episode for you. And so, again, at the time of this recording, I've only watched Memento, and the Odyssey is a couple of months away, but we have that to look forward to. So yeah, if you have not taken a trip down memory lane with Christopher Nolan's filmography, I recommend that you do so. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the Odyssey when it comes out later in 2026. All right, I'll see you in the next segment. Kids, welcome back to the Christopher Nolan episode of the podcast. In this part now, I'm going to continue onward to the next movie that I watched in Nolan's filmography. And this is another one, much like Memento, that I had not seen before. So this is my initial thoughts on the first time ever seeing this movie. And this is Nolan's second film titled Insomnia, released in 2002. And what's interesting about this one is that if you watch these movies back to back, or even if you just watch Christopher Nolan's career literally chronologically, so film by film, you can see him growing as a filmmaker, both as a director, as a writer. Though I don't think he solely wrote this script for this movie, but I'm sure he had some notes on it. But anyway, semantics. As a director, as a writer, as an editor, the whole bit, you can see him developing because whereas I was not fully in on Memento with Insomnia, I was totally in. I mean, everything that he got kind of going with Memento, the deep character analysis, the mystery, the overall sense of tone, and the misdirects, and making the audience feel as though they are a part of the movie. In the same way, the protagonist is discovering things about the story. We ourselves are also discovering things, and we're also kind of confused, and we're constantly on the edge of our seat. He took everything he learned by doing Memento and just upped it in Insomnia. This is a great thriller. And it's honestly, it's really, really simple. Whereas Memento, has the plot device of your main protagonist having memory issues and having, uh, two two chronological timelines of film, one going forward, one going backward, literally set by different colors of film, set apart from one another. And Insomnia, it's really quite simple. It's a murder mystery. It's a straightforward murder mystery. Really the elevator pitch is that a a woman gets murdered in Alaska, and an LA cop comes in to investigate the murder because he knows how to get the job done. He's meant to solve this case. That's pretty much the elevator pitch. But what makes it interesting is that they literally play into the fact that Alaska is unlike any other environment really you could ever encounter. Because in Alaska, it's either bright, like literally the whole year round, or it's dark, literally the whole year round, meaning you wake up in light, you go to bed in light. You wake up in dark, you go to bed in dark. And for Al Pacino, being the LA cop who comes to the scene, the literal environment that he's in is affecting his ability to do his job. Whereas he is now experiencing the Alaskan, you know, time, I don't know, what time effect of it being all day, all the time. And so the title Insomnia is very poignant because the main character, the detective that we follow, deals with insomnia. He can't sleep, and just as he is dealing with that physical effect that's happening to his body, he's also dealing with the mental strain of things going on with his partner in the movie, and also with having to solve the case, and then you know, minor, spoilers for this. I really should preface this too by saying that I'll speak about all these movies in a pretty open landscape here. So if you want to go into this movie blind like I did, kind of listen and watch, with I don't know, a set of guardrails on. But if you don't really care, if you've already seen the movies, progress forward. But the killer in Insomnia is revealed pretty early, and in fact, Al Pacino, our detective, he encounters the killer, played by Robin Williams, pretty early in the movie. And so, just as how sleep gnaws at him physically, the relationship he develops between the murderer, between the antagonist, played by Robin Williams, gnaws at him mentally as well. And so, this guy is just going around the block here with all these struggles. And what's interesting too is that Al Pacino, this is nothing new for him. He's played literally detective roles before. I mean, he's in my favorite crime movie ever, 1995's Heat, directed by Michael Mann, and in that he's part of the homicide division, also in L.A. Funny enough as well. And so this, having been just 7 years later, less than a decade apart, you can already, he knows how to do these roles. This is nothing new for him, and he excels in this kind of role. Whereas Robin Williams, he's a comedian. I mean, if you don't know this, kids, Robin Williams is the voice of the genie in Aladdin, in the original animated Aladdin. So he's that guy. He's funny. He's witty. He's charming. He's for the kids essentially. Everyone really knows him as a comedic actor, but for him to abandon all of that and to become literally the enemy in this movie, the antagonist going against Al Pacino, to be the man on the run, to be the killer that we're gonna pursue in this movie, freaking nuts. And he plays it so bone chilling, just so straight, because he's not just some doofus. He's calm, he's cool, he's collected, and there's this constant game of cat and mouse to where you think Al Pacino has the upper hand, then you realize Robin Williams does. And then they both start to lose their cool and then they rein it back in. I mean, it is a game of wits. It has incredible dialogue. The setting of this movie is great. I mean, Alaska is a beautiful state. I mean, just the color scheme, very simple, but just remarkably effective. The muted colors, the sense of ice blues and whites and dark greens and browns, and the darkness of asphalt. And then you throw in like the mountain ranges and the fog that comes across the water. I mean, this movie is spooky, but in like a very digestible and approachable way. Whereas like this all can sound really tense and kind of frightening. It's just frightening enough to where you're curious, to where you're like, what's around that corner, what's around that rock. I want to see where this goes. I'm watching this movie, and the same thing with Memento. Like from the first 10 minutes in, they kind of just set you up with everything that you need to to go on, and then you can unravel that movie as it progresses. With Insomnia, I mean, this thing just flew by. Like you are just locked in, and I realized that the first time I checked the timestamps, I was over 20 minutes in. I mean, they just go, here is your antagonist, here's your protagonist, here's the case, boom. You're watching the film. I mean, and it is a really gripping thriller, excuse me. And I just thought that this movie was great. And I thought that where Memento kind of lacked in terms of cohesiveness and kind of got too big for its britches, I thought that Insomnia again expanded upon having deep characters, a really you know impactful sense of atmosphere, yet it maintained a sense of seriousness, a sense of what's the word I want to use? I thought this thing was really smart. I at the end of it, I thought like I learned something, which is really, a testament to Christopher Nolan movies. The fact that you can kind of dive into these really mature topics and you come away feeling smarter. Because again, as I said earlier, we too are unraveling things about the plot just as the characters are. We're not just watching these things unfold, we're also learning as well. And so when clues are found, when revelations are made, we're like, oh, that's right, or yep, saw that coming. But even though we might see things coming, it's still incredibly rewarding as well. And then when the twists happen, you're also like, holy crap, I did not see that coming. Show me more. I mean, this thing is sharp, smart, it knows what it wants to do, flies by, and it gives just great performances set in a really cool environment, again, being Alaska. And it tells a really simple story of a detective pursuing a murderer and trying to solve the case. Boom. There you go. So, yeah, Insomnia, a really good follow up to Memento. And again, really kind of shows the. Uh, the developing skill set that is Christopher Nolan, again, just in terms of writing, directing, casting, editing, because this thing is also edited really well as well. Lots of quick shots that just again leave breadcrumbs for the viewer. I just think that this movie is fantastic, and so if you have not seen Insomnia, I really do recommend it. I think it's a great movie, and yeah, so that is my part two when it comes to reviewing Christopher Nolan's filmography, and then I will come back and I will record a third portion here, and then eventually this episode will be released to you kids, to the faithful listeners. So yeah, just thanks for being along for the ride, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye bye. Kids, welcome back to the Far Out Podcast. And for myself, it truly is a return because this is a compilation video of going through Christopher Nolan's filmography leading up to the release of his newest film titled The Odyssey. And I have been recording this episode over the course of not just days, not just weeks, but also months, because the first two segments you heard from this episode, that being covering it was Insomnia and Memento. Those segments were recorded back in February, and now I am recording this latest segment, the third segment, in June. And I truly do not know why it took me this long to circle back on Christopher Nolan, or why it took me this long to quote unquote finish this episode. And I've done previous episodes like this before where I'm doing a lead up to some movie like I did with, Project Hail Mary. I did a compilation video of certain sci-fi movies before that one came out. I did that over the course of days, maybe weeks, but for whatever reason, I started on Nolan's filmography and then I just tapped out for a bit. Not due to Me disliking the movies. Oh, no, no, no. I mean, the every movie I'm going to review in this collection I've seen, and the only ones I had not seen were Memento and Insomnia. So I got the quote unquote tough stuff out of the way. Well, I say that was still having to rewatch Tenet. The one time I watched that movie, I frankly did not care for it that much. But we'll see how my thoughts change after a second viewing. I've only seen it legitimately one time, and so I'm going to be going back into that movie pretty much with a fresh mindset, with almost a completely clean slate, because that movie came out, I believe, in 2021. So it's been years since I've rewatched Tenet, but it's also been years since I've rewatched the latest movie I decided to revisit in his filmography, that being 2006's The Prestige. And just that alone, the year in which this came out, the fact that this movie is 20 years old, crazy, crazy. This movie could be released today, and it would still hit just as hard. It would still, frankly, I think it'd be more of a success than it was back then. Christopher Nolan is one of the best filmmakers in the world, and The Prestige is proof of that idea. When I say that, and when other people say that, they should point to The Prestige. Yes, you can point to Inception, you can point to The Dark Knight, you can point to Interstellar, all great films. But there's something about The Prestige that just, I don't know. For some reason, this one is never talked about in the same light as his other movies. Again, as I mentioned, when people think of Christopher Nolan, odds are they're going to go to Batman, because Batman is a freaking cultural icon. Then they might go to, say, Inception, and now recently they'll go to Oppenheimer. I don't hear a lot of discourse around The Prestige, and I think that is a real shame, because this movie is incredible. It's great. It's fantastic. The the elevator pitch of The Prestige is dueling magicians. That's it. That's it in a sentence. But it's not dueling magicians in terms of like Harry Potter. It's dueling magicians in terms of how far would you go to not only elevate yourself, but to also destroy someone else around you. The movie The Prestige centers on Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale. By the way, phenomenal cast across the board. You got Michael Caine, Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman, Scarlett Johansson, many other great ones. And the movie centers around them playing dueling magicians, in the sense that Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale both want to be the best magician in the world, and they also want to demolish each other because they've personally done wrong to one another. And this movie has to do with selfishness, with pride, all these huge high concept things, and it is constantly turning its head on the audience, and it says it outright. I mean, the opening narration, is that there's, a magic act is broken up into three acts. There's the pledge, there's the turn, then there's the prestige. The pledge is you present something ordinary, the turn is you say make it disappear, and then the prestige is to bring it back. And that's really how it's broken down. Those words are effectively said in the movie. And the movie is speaking not only in terms of its story, but also into the audience, because it's telling us, are you watching closely? And Prestige is a movie you have to watch closely, because there's misdirects, and there's stuff told out of chronological order, and there's callbacks, and this movie is edited within an inch of its life, but it's done to in perfection. This movie, everything fires on all cylinders. The writing, the acting, the dialogue, even the time period it's set in the 1800s, right at the turn of the century, where electricity is a thing, it's prevalent, but like science is just now kind of budding, and people are afraid of it, and you can tell that there's this fervor for what the future is going to bring, but like just kind of that steampunk era set back in the again in the 1800s, revolving around England, like Nikola Tesla in this is a character in the movie, and like so there's this added fascination of blurring the lines between, you know,
magic, effectively, sorcery and science, and then where does it fall into the practical world? And it's crazy the things that this movie presents itself and the concepts it wants to explore in this narrative are freaking incredible. But then it goes into the point of like, okay, you have these two magicians who are obsessed with one another, absolutely obsessed, and they will outright try to kill each other at some point. They will disregard their own lives. They will disregard the lives of their families, their wives, their children. Who cares? The whole point is the act. They are more committed to the art of sleight of hand, to the art of mystery, to the art of being a magician, to being a performer, than they are to being a good husband, being a good father. And it's a devastating movie from that perspective because you are watching people get absolutely lost in their professions. Yet you can't not look away because they're so committed and you are so locked in on their rides that you want to see them both succeed and fail at times. And that's the thing too. I've seen The Prestige before. The first time I ever saw the movie, I legitimately broke a sweat while watching it. That's happened twice when I've watched Christopher Nolan movies. First time I saw The Prestige, I broke a sweat. First time I saw Interstellar, I broke a sweat. Because these movies, his movies, The Prestige in particular, are so dense and they have so much text and subtext. It is crazy. And the fact that, again, this is all conveyed in a narrative that you can follow. It itself is not straightforward. It takes left, it takes turns, it goes back around, does a loop de loop, and then it finds a way to get through. Yet you, as a watcher of this movie, can follow it. You will get invested, and the world it's diving into is remarkable. Like, if there were a sequel to The Prestige, like, for me that makes so much sense because like there's so much left to examine on this movie in my opinion. And again, the fact that Christopher Nolan, in the eyes of the mass public, had not, quote, hit his stride because again, um Batman is coming, The Dark Knight is coming, Interstellar's coming, Oppenheimer's coming, you know the idea that he's not at the top of his game yet, I disagree. I think that The Prestige is arguably his best film because it's able to take a concept that sounds kind of wacky in a time period that can be a hard sell. It's a period piece ultimately, you know, yet he's able to tell this with a level of sophistication, of seriousness, of digestibility that the common Joe Schmo citizen who watches this movie will not get lost. As I said earlier, you will get sucked in, as I did upon this rewatch. Just as I was rewatching it, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot how good this was. Then the movie goes on and on and on, and I was just locked in. I was purely locked in. Yeah, wow. This movie, rewatching it, revisiting it, is an absolute reminder of just how good Christopher Nolan is, not only as a director in of himself, but also in how good of a director for his entire crew he is. Because this movie is a testament to having incredible writers, incredible set designers, incredible costuming, incredible lighting technicians. The list goes on. Everything in this movie is operating on the top of its game, and the fact that it's a drama about magic, about magicians, is insane, And then also, Christopher Nolan, boy, does he love time because he loves to tell things out of order, yet again, not get things lost. He loves to just chop things up and tell the end first. Then we go back to the beginning. Then we visit the middle. Then we go to the end again. I mean, it's nuts. And I'm trying. I want to talk about this movie in context, but not in spoilers, because I want people to see this movie and unravel it for the first time like I did. Um, It's freaking bananas. And for me, this movie sparks my imagination. It sparks my curiosity. And I could turn right back on right now. I could rewatch it all over again. I'm so serious. The fact that I haven't revisited this movie as much as I have others, even outside of Nolan himself, the fact that you know it's like, I kind of want to watch something tonight. What should I put on? Should I put on Star Wars? Should I put on Star Trek? Should I put on Transformers? I should put on The Prestige. The fact that I haven't had that thought more beats the heck out of me, because this movie is like a glass of wine. It's meant to be enjoyed slowly. It is thought provoking. Um, yeah, wow. It's one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, in my opinion. I truly believe that, and I'm so happy to have revisited it. And yeah, I think that if this is one that people have skipped from Nolan's filmography, because again, it's not Batman, it's not Inception, so on and so forth. Do yourself a favor, watch it. Treat yourself to The Prestige, and even if you have seen it recently, watch it again. And if you're someone like myself who hasn't seen this movie in probably over 5 or 6 years now, go back and revisit it, because I tell you what, I had not realized how incredible this movie is. And again, I think this is where Christopher Nolan kind of outdid himself here. I think, well, what year? Well, Batman Begins came out really close to The Prestige. In fact, Batman Begins might have came out first. So if Batman Begins, because I think Batman Begins was 2005. If Batman Begins was his launching point, that was kind of like the jump into everything. The Prestige is Nolan sticking the landing, and then from there he just goes off into a dead sprint with The Dark Knight, with Inception and Interstellar and The Dark Knight Rises. Just some incredible filmmaking on his part. And yeah, The Prestige. I could go on just waxing poetically about it, but again, I want to leave it up to you. I want to leave it up to you, to the audience, and yeah, I hope you do yourself a favor and watch this movie, because it is incredible. But I also want to say thank you just for for continuing to watch and listen to the Far Out podcast. Again, by the time that this episode does come out, you, the audience for this, will be able to listen to it in its entirety, in one shot. But for myself, again, this is recorded over the course of months, and I do not know why. Admittedly, I truly don't. But yeah, for me, this has just been a labor of love. It's been fun to revisit all these movies again, leading up to the Odyssey. And yeah, just thanks to everyone who watches, who listens, and who enjoys this kind of uh, deep analysis on kind of a more specific topic. But yeah, just it's been a lot of fun for me to revisit the Nolan movies, and I hope that you yourself have fun doing that as well, if you're also doing a kind of rewatch leading up to the Odyssey. And I guess I'll see you in the next segment. All right, bye bye. Kids, welcome back to the Far Out Podcast. It is now time for me to continue my exploration into Christopher Nolan's filmography as I ramp up for the release of his newest movie, The Odyssey. But before I get to the movies in question that I've seen recently, I also want to let you know about another way I'm preparing for the release of the upcoming movie. That being, I'm going back and I am reading The Odyssey proper, or should I say, I am listening to it, because I am diving into the Odyssey, Penguin Publishing's version of the Odyssey via audio tape. But for the sake of this conversation, this recording, I will say that I read the book, air quotes, read it, but I'm actually listening to it, but semantics. But yes, I am listening to the Penguin Publishing version of the Odyssey, narrated by Ian McKellen, Gandalf himself, Magneto himself, and that makes the experience all that better. But I want to let you know some things. I have now reached the halfway mark, literally the 50% mark through the Odyssey, and I have some thoughts. Firstly, just based off of reading the first half, 50%, I have no way how the Odyssey could be adapted into one single movie. Two, despite me saying that, I think that Christopher Nolan is the right man for the job. And thirdly, I think that it is of high importance, dare I say, an outright need, that people have an understanding of the Iliad before they go into the Odyssey, whether that's the book, the movie, so on and so forth. Actually, I want to give a little bit of a sidebar to this stuff as well. In terms of, the Iliad and the Odyssey, written by Homer, you know, they're essentially translations of translations. I'm listening to the Penguin Publishing version. There are other versions that exist out there, so on and so forth. But, to my understanding, the Iliad and the Odyssey, they're based off of Greek poetry. They've been translated, and they've been compiled into these books that we can, consume. So I understand that there's some creative liberties just with the books that we can get nowadays. So that being said, I also understand that there's going to need to be some creative liberties for whatever adaptations come, including Christopher Nolan's upcoming movie as well. That being said, though, I assume that Chrissy Nolan is going to try to adhere, relatively closely to whatever version he is wanting to adapt. That being said, though, I can't imagine there's too many distinctions between the Penguin publishing version, the other version, so on and so forth. My point is that, again, having just consumed half of the story, I have no idea how you make this into one singular movie. I kind of wish now, in retrospect, that Chrissy Nolan would have taken the route of a Denis Villeneuve, because he's the director of Dune's part 1 and 2, now part 3. Well, Dune, part 1 and 2, it took him 2 movies to get through one book, and the original Dune novel written by Frank Herbert is some literally and metaphorically dense literature. It's several hundred pages long, and it's a thinker. You have to sit down and focus. I mean, you have to read this thing slowly. It's a lot to digest. The Iliad and the Odyssey are the exact same way. And when I listened to the Iliad, I had to, really focus and try to pay attention. And I still got lost as I listened to the Iliad. It's complicated. In my opinion, it's frankly convoluted. I wish it would have been a little more streamlined. And there's a lot of just stuff and characters and, the way they speak in terms of metaphor and simile and all that stuff. You have to pay attention and do your homework. I did not enjoy the Iliad as much. Again, I'm glad that I listened to it, but I just found it to be, it was a lot to chew on. That being said, though, I now go into the Odyssey. I'm reading that book. I'm listening to the Penguin Publishing version, same publisher that did the version of the Iliad I listened to. And I'm very thankful now that I listened to the Iliad, because the Odyssey is the same way. It's still dense. It's still complicated, less convoluted in my opinion. But the Iliad has provided some crucial context for things happening in the Odyssey. About locations, characters, so on and so forth. Again, I think you could go into the Odyssey, blind. You could just jump into that. But again, having the context and having the framework that the Iliad provided has made the overall experience much more satisfying, much more easy to understand, and frankly more rewarding. So with that in mind, I wonder then if Christopher Nolan is going to, give any kind of, backstory stuff regarding the Iliad. I think it's important. And honestly, I could have easily seen Christopher Nolan make this epic of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He could have done that in 3 movies. He could have done the Iliad in 1, the Odyssey in 2. Heck, he could have done it as a 4-pack. 2 for the Iliad, 2 for the Odyssey. Or maybe at a bare minimum, he should have done it as a again, go the route of Denis Villeneuve, he could have done the Iliad, as part one, the Odyssey as part two, because again, having now consumed the Iliad, there's things that are outright mentioned and talked about in just the first half alone of the Odyssey that I'm like, oh yeah, that's that guy from that thing. He did that thing, earlier, blah 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 blah. So, again, I wonder if Christopher Nolan should have allowed himself more room to just get more of the Iliad in there. On top of that, I think from what I've now consumed of the Odyssey, again being the first half, the literal first half, that might be what Christopher Nolan is targeting in his movie. Because since reaching the halfway mark, I've gone back and I've rewatched the trailers for the Odyssey, and there are shots in the trailers that are either full blown representations of scenes from the first half or they're alluding to scenes. But there are things I'm picking up on to where now, again, I watch the trailers and I'm like, that looks like that appears that could be like that sounds like that, so on and so forth. So again, maybe Christopher Nolan's going to take creative liberties. Maybe he's going to cherry pick scenes throughout the entirety of the narrative, do a little bit from here, a little bit from there, so on and so forth. That's fine and dandy, but like, I almost think the first half could be its own movie as well. On top of that, in my opinion, the book it got good right around the 30% mark. I was about one third of the way through. So from 30% to 50%, that's where you deal with things like the Trojan horse, meaning the Cyclops, some other stuff, so on and so forth. And that alone, just a handful of chapters, 20%, I think is enough to tell, that's enough for one whole movie. Again, I have no idea of the format in which Christopher Nolan is going to try to condense this story. He's essentially taking this huge, larger-than-life epic and putting it into a darn near 3-hour movie. I don't know how anyone can do it, but if anyone can do it, it's probably him. So it's interesting. Again, this might sound a little crazy, but I wonder. I honestly wish there is like a planned sequel to the Odyssey. Again, I haven't even seen the movie yet, but I mean, depending on how he chooses to tell this story, I bet he's going to leave a lot on the cutting room floor. I bet he's going to. There are things that are probably going to happen throughout the movie that I wish would either be expanded upon or stuff like that. Who knows? But like the Odyssey is a very dense book, and in my opinion, it is better than the Iliad. But I think that the Iliad is just as important to fully understand things. So, yeah, Christopher Nolan has a tall order to fulfill here, and telling the Odyssey as one singular movie. I don't know how he's going to do it. I don't even know if that's the right approach now, having read just half of the Odyssey, and not, and let's not forget as well, again, the Iliad could be its own separate thing as well. Who knows what kind of representation that'll have in the movie as well. But yeah, again, at the time of this recording, it is now July 7th. I'm halfway through the Odyssey, really enjoying it. Lots of cool stuff that I think we're seeing in the trailers, but that's just like a taste. That's just a taste of what we might get in the movie. So who knows? But yeah, wow. Again, I thought I was already excited for the Odyssey as a movie, but now having dove into the literature of it all, it's making me even more excited. So yeah, the Odyssey. This is going to be a real curious one to see how Christopher Nolan pulls it off. And yeah, I can't wait. The movie cannot get here fast enough. But before we get to the newest release from Christopher Nolan, let's talk about his previous releases. That being Inception. And look, kids, in life, you remember a lot of things. You remember your first car, your first job, your first Batman movie, your first James Bond movie. For those two respectively, Batman was The Dark Knight Rises, and first Bond was Casino Royale. Well, with Daniel Craig, my first Christopher Nolan movie was Inception, and I remember hearing about this movie as a kid, like, oh, it's so complicated, it's so out there, man, it's the new Matrix, you can't possibly understand it, you're gonna get lost, and it's so much fun, blah 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 blah. I gotta be honest, every time I've seen the movie, including my very first time I saw Inception, I just understood it front to back. And that's a testament to Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, as a writer, as a storyteller. Because Inception is dense in its own right. I mean, this movie is a meal in terms of plot, world building, so on and so forth. The elevator pitch of Inception is dreams within dreams and fighting inside dreams, exploring dreams, and so on and so forth. Talking about layers and losing one's mind and consciousness and reality and perception. Big, heavy duty concepts that he's able to introduce and then execute throughout a movie that comes in at under 3 hours. Freaking crazy. On top of that, he has an incredible cast. Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, all these incredible actors. But like, I think that while Inception might not be my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, and again, upon doing this rewatch of his filmography, I honestly I don't know what my favorite would be, because like I just watched The Prestige, like that movie is incredible. I just finished Inception, that thing is also incredible. Even just those two alone, I'm struggling to decide which one do I like more. I will say this though, while it might not be my favorite, and who knows by the time I get through his catalog here, this is perhaps the most quintessential Christopher Nolan movie. I think that this is a great one to really start your analysis of him. When you hear the name Christopher Nolan and someone says, "Where do I start?" I think Inception is kind of the one. It has all of the hallmarks of him: time manipulation, a cool idea, again, fighting within dreams, a great cast, cool locales, awesome dialogue, awesome action. I mean, Christopher Nolan knows how to make a really entertaining movie. This thing has it all. It's so unique and so inventive and so inviting. Again, very very much or very similarly to how I spoke about how I almost wish there was like a sequel or a companion piece, to the Odyssey movie. You could say the same thing for Inception because these ideas are so larger than life. It's almost like, why is there only one movie, so on and so forth. So I mean, he brings everything to the table. All of his movies are full meals, and there's a lot here to enjoy. And yeah, again, just upon doing this rewatch, I was thinking to myself like, wow, I mean, this guy has the goods. He is one of the best of the best. I mean, he is a filmmaker's filmmaker, and the way he's able to do things. And again, Christopher Nolan loves to do stuff for real, and so like you're seeing, real sets, real effects, all this cool stuff, and of course there's special effects too. But like the way he's able to just capture stuff and then present it to audiences in ways where you don't get lost, it's incredible. He's a genuine artist. And so yeah, rewatching Inception for the first time in frankly many years was just it was a treat. I mean, it was just, again, going back to the first movie I saw from him. It's aged beautifully. I picked it up just immediately. I mean, I wasn't lost, I wasn't bored, nothing like that. I immediately got sucked into the story, into the world. I think it's incredible. And so, yeah, Inception is a remarkable movie. And if anyone said, "Oh, that one is my favorite one," I'd be like, I get it. Because, like, all the movies are like, a 9, 9.5, 9.8. And Inception is certainly up there. And yeah, it was a really, really great rewatch. And then, speaking of my Nolan rewatch, I also recently finished Interstellar. And wow. Again, if someone came to me and said, "This one's my favorite Nolan movie," I'd get it. I completely get it. Again, this is another movie that's filled with nothing but hallmarks of Nolan's filmmaking. Uh, Time stuff, cool ideas, sci-fi, all that stuff. This is a love letter to space operas, to 2001: A Space Odyssey, pun intended. Like the way he does this stuff, and again, with any Christopher Nolan movie, whether it's The Prestige, Inception, including Interstellar, he presents all these things as real. I mean, he really tries to just get down to the roots of ideas, to the roots of the hard science, and not only wants to film as much as he can for real, but present it as, what if this is real? And if it is real, how much of it can I convey throughout my plot, throughout my characters, throughout my dialogue, my actions, so on and so forth. Like, if you're a fan of space exploration, NASA, you know, the Final Frontier, stuff like that, I mean, like, this is incredible. It's great sci-fi writing, but it feels very tangible and real and applicable, and it just makes the movie all that more frankly awesome, in my opinion. On top of that, this might be Hans Zimmer's best work in terms of score. I think now after this rewatch, it is my favorite Hans Zimmer score. Again, much like Christopher Nolan, Hans Zimmer scored on an average bat, a 9.5. Prior to this rewatch, I would have told you that my favorite Zimmer score was Man of Steel, which Nolan was an executive producer on, funny enough. Now after this rewatch, though, the music of Interstellar, I mean, it does so much. It carries so much water, and that's not to demean the rest of the movie. I'm not saying that the music makes up for anything in the movie, by no means. I'm just saying that the music is just, it's frosting. It's butter over all this food. It's incredible. But like, again, the casts that Nolan is able to conjure up. You got Anne Hathaway, Matthew McConaughey, Matt Damon. I mean, all these actors are just so great, and they play such great parts. And in Interstellar, the human aspect of it all, again, taking these larger than life concepts and presenting them to us audiences is one thing, but to bring in the human aspect, to bring it down to the studs of a father-daughter story, it's riveting. It takes your breath away. It frankly brought tears to my eyes, and I mean that sincerely. Like, it pulls at your heartstrings, and it's so touching, and it's so real. And then it's wrapped up. It's surrounded by all this great space stuff, and the visuals of this movie are just astonishing. I remember seeing the movie for the first time in its release back in 2014. I was in the theater. The movie took my breath away, and I literally broke a sweat watching Interstellar. I was so locked in. I was on the edge of my seat. I then saw the movie recently. It was sometime either last year or in 2024. I did a rewatch of the movie in theaters. It came back to theaters. Saw it again. Blew my mind again. Like, just awesome. But even now, just watching it at my place for this episode of the podcast here, still blew my mind. And the visuals alone of just exploring space and the black hole. I mean, it's awesome. And again, if you're someone who loves this stuff, like myself, I'm all in on NASA and the Artemis missions and all that stuff. The idea of going into this new frontier of pushing ourselves farther and exploring, black holes, wormholes, time dilation. Oh, it's fascinating stuff. It's fascinating. And then again, you have the human element that just grounds everything. It makes you feel, and despite me saying this, I know I'm describing kind of honestly a pretty heavy movie, and it really does. It pulls at you. It's so entertaining, and it's so much fun to watch. And I could easily rewatch Interstellar over again. I think it is one of Nolan's most rewatchable movies, in my opinion, and I think it's just incredible. I will now. I do want to talk about some quibbles with the movie. Again, these aren't even issues. They're just observations. They're quibbles that I made throughout this rewatch here. In the movie, Matthew McConaughey has a son and a daughter. Really, kind of the focal point of the relationship that we see is between father and daughter. With that being said, though, the son, who is funny enough played by Timothée Chalamet of all people, he is pretty much neglected throughout the movie. Again, just like if you wanted the father-daughter aspect to be the focal point, why not just have her be an only child? And, if you've seen the movie, you know that the brother does play, some significance in the plot, especially later on in the movie. But again, just kind of quibbles. Like, he was such a good dad, so caring, so thoughtful to his daughter. But Matthew McConaughey in the movie is really not there at all for his son, and kind of just treats him as an afterthought. Whether that was intentional, unintentional, I don't know. But again, just kind of a quibble. Well, the much larger quibble of the whole thing is frankly the last roughly 25 minutes of the movie. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, I'm going to spoil it. So, I don't want to. I did not want to speak about really any of these movies in context and full context. But for Interstellar, I am going to give spoilers for the end. So please, I want you, yes, you, I want you, the faithful listener, the faithful viewer, to experience these movies for yourself. To have that moment for you. I want you to go in blind. However, for Interstellar, I am going to get more into the weeds now, so you've been warned. Okay, there are spoilers for the end of Interstellar in three, two, one. So the the fifth dimension, the tesseract of it all that Matthew McConaughey comes into contact with, and essentially discovers that. And even just now, as I'm talking, I'm having a hard time articulating what I think the real endgame of this is. To me, it almost conveys itself as a type of time loop of a movie because time can transcend space and time and all that stuff, and there's the fifth dimension is the fifth dimension, and nothing can hold it. Blah 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 blah. Well, you go through the movie and you find out that this message that Earth is receiving that sparks the whole thing, that sparks the whole mission that we go on Interstellar, that Matthew McConaughey is a part of. You discover at the end of the movie that Matthew McConaughey was the one that sent the message, was able to convey the message to Earth in the first place. So the thing is essentially a loop. It's essentially a paradox. It's a, self-fulfilling prophecy. Whatever you want to call it. This is where you lose kind of the hard science of Interstellar and you get more into science fiction, which I don't know why, but on this rewatch of Interstellar, this is the one where I kind of bumped into that a little bit. I did not bump into it when I saw the movie the first time in 2014. Haven't bumped into it during subsequent rewatches, including seeing it in the theater again for another time. This time though, 2026. I have no idea why. This one where I was like, again, you did so well on landing the science plane, yet with the very end, with the thing, you get a little squirrely, because but again, a lot of this stuff is theoretical, and you could even say, well, Jim, Matthew McConaughey goes into a black hole. You can't go into a black hole. What are we talking about here? I understand. It's not science fact the whole way through. It's a movie. You have to take creative liberties. A lot of this stuff is just based on gosh darn theories, all that good stuff. I'm just saying it was just a smidge jarring, the ending of it all with the Tesseract and all that stuff. But I digress. Rewatching it again now for the upteenth time in 2026, I found the film to be remarkable. And again, the music popped more than ever. The relationships popped more than ever. The visuals continue to pop. Again, much like every other movie Nolan has made, it has aged to perfection. I think it could be released today. I could turn it back on right now. It's remarkable. And again, Christopher Nolan sets up these huge things that I could easily see him wanting to expand the story with some kind of companion piece, whether that's a sequel or just something. They leave so much on the table in a good way, and you feel very satisfied at the end of this movie. But they place so much stuff in front of the audience, and they say, "Here, this is what our movie is made of. Run with it." And you do. You just want to run with it. Hence why you want to rewatch it, revisit it. Just dive back into it. So yeah, Interstellar, just phenomenal. It's another one that I'm very happy to have revisited it, and it's been a couple of years since I did that rewatch of it in the theater, and so just picking this one back up, I really enjoyed it, and yeah, if you have not seen Interstellar, I apologize for anyone who I did spoil it for. I feel that I gave ample warning, but your mileage may vary. But if you have not seen Interstellar, and even if you did listen to my spoiler portion of the review, do yourself a favor. Watch it, experience it, just get lost in it. It's awesome, and yeah, wow, Christopher Nolan, as again, he's a filmmaker's filmmaker, and this one is one of his best. Might excuse me, might be my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. I think it's definitely my favorite score from his movies. Might be my favorite score from Hans Zimmer overall. And it might even be my favorite Nolan movie, but that maybe that's another conversation for a later day. But yeah, Interstellar is just incredible. What else can I say? Kids, welcome back to the Far Out Podcast. It is now July 8th, and I have just finished rewatching Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. And wow, I I'm gonna say something that sounds stupid because I'm recording a podcast, but I'm speechless. I'm speechless. Yet I'm gonna try to power through this anyway. So Dunkirk is I gotta be honest. In the catalog of Nolan films, Dunkirk has been on the lower side of things. I remember seeing it in the theaters back in 2017, nearly a full decade ago, which even just saying that out loud, I'm like, what? But yes, I saw this movie in theaters in 2017. First time I saw it, I did not like it. And I was like, man, I don't get it, because it wasn't what I was expecting. I remember, kids, I was there, kids, when it was announced that Christopher Nolan was going to do a war movie, and that's what Dunkirk is. So I was expecting the bang bang, the pew pew. I wanted his version of Saving Private Ryan, and it's really not that. There's action in the movie. Yes, there's explosions and deaths and all this chaotic energy, but like it's not your typical war movie or action movie. It's very contemplative, to be honest. And for myself, who again, I was just a young man back then. Now I'm in my later 20s, but back then it wasn't what I was expecting. Therefore, I left the theater disappointed. Then I went back a second time because I was like, man, I was looking forward to this one so much. Like we only get Nolan every 2, 3, 4 years. Like let me see it. Let me see it again. Let me see what I missed. Second time I saw it in the theater, still didn't like it. I saw it at some point after it left the theaters. I don't know, maybe sometime between, I don't know, 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. Third time I saw it, still did not like it. I think I liked it more the third time around, but I was still kind of like, whatever. Again, if you want to watch something Nolan related, throw on Interstellar, throw on Inception, throw on The Prestige. I was like, I'm not feeling Dunkirk. This time, though, which I'm pretty sure is the fourth time I've ever seen the movie in my entire life, the fourth time, that was the one. This was the one where I got it. I see the beauty of Dunkirk, and I see the reserved nature it is playing for us, the audience, and I get what Nolan was going for because yes, this is a war movie, yet it is a different kind of war movie in the fact that it is not focused on action or this hoorah, let's go get 'em mentality. This is a movie purely and simply about survival. And this movie rocks you to the core just time and time again. All you're doing throughout this movie, this I'm gonna say this as a compliment, even though it sounds like it's a really harsh negative. This movie is depressing. It's depressing. It is not your typical war movie, but it is purely focused on the thing of survival, meaning that throughout the entirety of the movie, we are witnessing our central characters just go through peril after peril and somehow miraculously survive. Dunkirk, which is based on a true story, a real series of events that actually took place in World War II. It tells the story about the Allied forces consisting of British and France and whoever else happened to be there at the time, about them literally getting backed up to the ocean. The enemy is approaching via air, ground, sea, all that stuff, and this is kind of their last bastion of hope, their last chance at escape, and that's what this movie is. It is, yes, it's a war movie, but it's a it's a war movie that focuses on a retreat, not an advancing. It focuses on retreat. And so the entire time you're watching the movie, you're seeing our main cast of characters, escape, you know, airstrikes, and then they try to get to the lifeboats, and then, oh, thank goodness, they finally made it to a lifeboat. Now they can get away, from Dunkirk. They can get back home. Oh, well, then that lifeboat is struck by another airstrike, meaning they have to abandon ship. And then what about all the people that were already on the ship? What about the soldiers that didn't make it? What about the wounded that were prioritized to get onto the boats in the first place? They had first dibs at getting floor space. They're not gonna be able to get off. Now that they just got sucked under the water and all that stuff. So then you have to watch all these people just scramble back to the beach. They went even further back this time now. And the whole time you're watching the movie, you're frankly seeing the soldiers lose hope. Again, this movie is depressing, but it is beautiful in the sense that despite all that, there's pockets of hope. There's the occasional, Royal Air Force fighter that's trying to provide some alleviation of the strikes. There's the idea that, alongside, our core cast of characters, after the second failed escape attempt, they managed to pick up a few more stragglers. Now our group of five is a group of seven. When you're following this growing group of people just endure and survive. And yes, you're watching them go through hardship after hardship, and it is depressing on that note. However, on the other side, the fact that they continue to live and continue to persist, that keeps you going. That keeps you going as an audience member, and that keeps our characters going as they live throughout the events depicted in the movie. And of course, there's infighting among them because, everyone's mad and tired and confused. They just want to go home, and so it's not like they're just this band of brothers, saying we can do it. We just got to stick together. I mean, it is relentless in how it portrays the cost of war. Again, without it being overly bloody or overly violent or anything like that. But you're seeing the effects of war taking place across the three different battlefields, because Dunkirk is split up into three storylines. You have the air, the sea, and the ground, and all of them run mostly cohesively, and I'll get to that in a second. They run congruently throughout the course of the movie. The portion on the ground takes over the course of a week. The portion in the air takes over the portion over the sea takes place over a day, and the portion in the air takes place over an hour. Yet all of these stories do coincide with one another. They do crisscross. And the way this movie is cut, you have to pay real close attention, because much like most Christopher Nolan movies, this thing is told out of chronological order. For the most part, it's pretty, one, two, three, A, B, C, so on and so forth. But there are a few points to where they're showing you things a little bit in the future or a little bit in the past, and they don't give you any warning. It just goes from one scene to the next, and you as the viewer have to pick up on the context and, more importantly, the subtext of what's going on. So that was a little bit, that was just another kind of mental hurdle for me to get over, where a few times I was like, oh, I get it. Okay, I see what he's doing. We're gonna spend 2, 3, 4 minutes onto this thing. Okay, now we're moving on. Not really. Hurdle's kind of a strong word. It's really not a bad thing. It was just kind of a quibble. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. But I would have liked had they just kind of continued on, ABC 1, 2, 3. But I digress. This movie, though, is beautiful from a spirit perspective and from a tone perspective. Again, despite it being relentless, but like, the desperation in this movie is so well portrayed. Despite the movie not being very long, normally when you think of Nolan, you think of things that are incredibly complex, and you also think of movies that are probably getting close to 3 hours long, which is what I feel his average probably is. Yet Dunkirk is under 2 hours long, yet it feels very long, and I think that's both a good thing and a bad thing. Nolan very, very acutely uses his time, and in some ways I wish he would have maybe focused on other parts, maybe, you put a little less focus on this, put a little more focus on that. Again, this movie is split up into three parts, yet it's told again in under 2 hours. But he doesn't waste any time, in my opinion. Me personally, I would have liked to have seen maybe more of the Air Force portion, and so on and so forth. But again, quibbles. They're just quibbles, kids. They're not even like, marks against this movie, because now I finally get it. Now I see the kind of war movie that Christopher Nolan was trying to tell. And what's interesting is that you have this cast, you have this group of characters that you're following, again, set across, land, air, and sea. Yet there's really not that much dialogue at all. Yes, there are people that say things, but like it's a really quiet, very reserved movie, and it just the facial expressions of our characters sell what's happening, and the way Christopher Nolan chooses to move the camera, the way things are shot and captured, and that the real heavy lifting in the movie, I think, is done by the cinematography, because this movie is beautiful, darn near looks like a freaking documentary on the war, and two, the music in this movie is really utilized properly, in my opinion. They let quiet moments be quiet, but then they just really just hit you right in the chest with a score that's letting you know that like danger is coming. Our heroes are going to be in peril, and it's like when you hear the roar of an engine overhead. It's like, is that a friendly airplane? Is that an enemy airplane? We won't know until it gets close enough. It's stuff like that. Like, so again, this movie is truly about survival. It's about escaping. It's about, just clinging to life. And again, it is a depressing movie. There are points where it brought tears to my eyes. I'm not kidding. As you kind of got into the last 20 minutes, I was just like, oh my gosh, and like also as you're watching these soldiers go through it, yes, they're soldiers, they're enlisted, but they're so young. I mean, they all look, early 20s, mid 20s tops, and then you have the handful of officers who are probably in their mid 30s, but like they're all just a bunch of kids, and they don't know what to do, and they're scared, and all that stuff. And then, I'm gonna spoil the movie. Spoilers for Dunkirk follow, and also, I mean, this is just literal history. So if you want to go read up on it, get full context for everything, go right ahead. But I'm gonna give spoiler-ish context for a portion of the movie, so you have been warned. Okay, the spoilers for Dunkirk are gonna roll in three, two, one. Well, the movie Dunkirk is based on the real events of Dunkirk, the Dunkirk evacuation, which ended up being a success. There were 400,000 men, and roughly 300,000 plus, made it off the island. So they go on to escape. Hoorah! Thank goodness we finally get a breath. Our characters get a breath. So on and so forth. But there's been this kind of very quiet, underlined throughout the movie that the Allied forces are being surrounded on multiple fronts, that there's this idea that they're going to lose the war, that Britain is going to be, in danger, England, all that stuff, the walls are closing in and all that. And there's this order that the evacuation is really important because Churchill wants 30 to 45,000 men to get recirculated back into the army, and that's kind of another thing too about Dunkirk, is that there's all these men sitting like fish in a barrel. I mean, literally just at the mercy of airstrikes, at the mercy of approaching tanks, and they're holding the line, they're holding defensively, but the defense is shrinking. They can't stop the enemy. They can really only slow it down and hopefully escape. But Churchill, he wants to recirculate the army to continue the fight, and so there's this idea that at a minimum they have to get at least 45,000 men out of Dunkirk. They end up getting 300,000 plus, like I said. Well, anyway, the movie ends where the characters we've been following, they make it to a train, and you're thinking, oh, thank goodness, they're finally free. They got some food, they got some water, they got a blanket, yada yada, and they're terrified to read the paper. They're terrified to see the populace because they think that they're gonna yell at them and spin on them and say, how dare you? We're fighting a war and all you care about is evacuation. You have a duty to hold the front line. You know, you have to take down some of the enemy, with us, blah, 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 stuff like that. They get to the paper and everything, and they're reading Churchill's address, and they're saying that, like, or, he's saying, and this isn't a direct quote by any means. Again, you can go read this for yourself, but like in in the address that they're reading in the paper, Churchill's talking about how this was a great military failure on every front via every metric, it's an evacuation. It is nothing but a retreat. But then Churchill goes on to say, he gives a rallying cry. We will fight in the air, we will fight in the seas, we'll fight in our streets and in the fields. We will not stop. And so there is this sense of like, yeah, we're gonna keep going, man. We're not gonna stop. But for our characters that we've been following, for again these young soldiers who are just in their early 20s, they read this and there's this look of anxiety on their face where they're like, frick, we got to go back. And the movie doesn't say, to be continued. It doesn't say, coming soon, Dunkirk Part 2, but it's just implied that the war goes on. Well, what do you need to fight a war? You need soldiers. And so odds are that despite everything our cast just went through, they're probably going to get recirculated and they're going to have to go fight on another frontier. Just crazy. And again, this movie sounds so depressing, and it kind of is, but like it left me in awe to where I get it. Like survival is enough, and that line is literally spoken. It's like once they get to the train station, they're being handed out, blankets and tea and all that stuff, and someone is saying, good job, well done, well done. And one of the soldiers, who, funny enough, is played by Harry Styles of One Direction, believe it or not. Yes, kids, Harry Styles, frontman of One Direction, stars in Dunkirk, and he's being handed a blanket and whatever, and the guy handing it out is saying, good job. Harry Styles turned to him and he says, we didn't do anything. All we did was survive. And the guy handing out munitions says, that's enough. That's enough. And that's what the movie's about. It's like, did you win? No. In fact, did you lose? Yes. Did you lose men along the way? Yes. Is the enemy closing in? Yes. But did you survive? Also yes. Meaning you can fight another day. And again, while that is a rallying cry for most, for the soldiers that have to actually get back out there and continue that rallying cry, they're like, oh crap. And that's the last shot of the movie. The movie actually fades to black. Again, spoilers. The movie actually fades to black. Then they go back in for one last shot. The actual last shot of the movie is that Nolan shows the anxious look on a soldier's face who just read Churchill's address in the paper. Then it goes to black for a second time. Then you get full credits. It is one last reminder that while our cast did survive, they got to go back out there. They got to go back out there. The fight goes on. And it's just, man, again, it's a different kind of war movie, but it is not shy in showing the true weight of war, even when you're not doing all the bang bang pew pew, throw a grenade that way, I need my rocket launcher, all that stuff. There is this sense of just hopelessness when you know that your back is against the wall. What are you going to do? How are you going to survive? You just got to find a way. And that's what this movie is. It is just people just finding a way over and over and over again to somehow make it out and to somehow stay alive long enough to evacuate. But man, every time our cast gets a breath, and you're like, oh, thank God, they finally made it. They're going to make it. spoiler alert again, the rug just gets pulled up from underneath them, and we as the audience are just like, freaking A, like, what's going on here? And that's why, again, despite this movie being under 2 hours long, it feels incredibly long because it's just like it seemingly never ends, which again is the absolute bookend of the movie. It's not ending, you know. But yeah, wow, Dunkirk. I get it. It took me four bites, at least four bites at the apple. I did not get it when I saw it back in its original run, but now in 2026, 9 years later, I get it. I get what Christopher Nolan was going for. Uh, does that mean it's my favorite Nolan movie? No. But is this movie? Do I understand it now on a deeper level, a philosophical level, even on a for an entertainment level, do I find more entertainment from it? Yes, 100%. Yes, I do. But it's still not my favorite Nolan movie. I'm really not sure what that is, but I'll be curious to know my own thoughts on that once I get through the rest of his catalog. But again, having revisited Dunkirk now all these years later, and literally being older, and I pray to God wiser. Uh, again, I was able to pick up on things, and so again, much like all the other movies I've talked about in this episode, if you haven't seen Dunkirk before, go in, treat yourself, but I don't think it's going to be what people expect. I don't think it's going to be what you expect, and so you have to go in with almost a bit of a reserved nature to it. You have to really pay attention because there's a lot beneath the surface. But also, if you haven't seen the movie in a while, again, much like myself, it's been a handful of years. Uh, yeah, go revisit it and like have a conversation with yourself about it. Like, how did that make you feel? Talk to friends about it. How did that make you feel if you choose to watch it with someone else? And then if you'd like to extend that conversation into the comment section of this episode, please go right ahead and drop your thoughts on Dunkirk down below. But yeah, wow. I hope I did a good enough job of conveying my thoughts throughout this recording here because this movie was a whirlwind for me. And just as I've been recording to you right now, the the credits have been rolling on mute, for Dunkirk. I mean, it is that fresh. Like the second, the credits came on, I was like, I gotta get on the microphone right now. This is too much, man. So yeah, Dunkirk, a different kind of war movie. One I did not get on my first couple, bites of the apple, but now again, the fourth time around, being older and again, hopefully wiser, I get it. And so if I can understand Dunkirk, you can too. And yeah, again, it's a different kind of war movie. It's dense, but once you kind of get what Nolan is going after, I think you're gonna like really, really appreciate it for what it is. So yeah, I'm very happy to say that 2017's Dunkirk is better than I remember.
Hey kids, welcome back to the Far Out Podcast. I am continuing my review of Christopher Nolan's catalog as the Odyssey fast approaches us, and I have just finished rewatching his 2020 movie titled Tenet. And there is a line of dialogue uh, in this movie that I think perfectly kind of describes how I've kind of come to terms with the movie and how I think the majority of people have, perhaps. And that is the line, don't try to understand it, feel it. And I got to be honest, that's kind of the best I got for this review or dialogue that I want to share about the movie. Because look, I've been a fan of Chrissy Nolan for years.
years and years and years. Even before I started, going to college and graduated college. Like I've been around his movies since like 2010, 11, 12. So I know like what he's all about. And having done this rewatch of his catalog, again, I'm taking a trip down memory lane, but I'm getting to see the different elements that he brings to a movie. I'm also getting to see him develop as a filmmaker, both from a director, writer, perhaps even an editor, who knows. Like there are shades of the filmmaker that Nolan wants to be and would become, even going as far back as Memento, then that gets followed up on with, say, something like Inception, Interstellar, so on and so forth. So when Tenet rolled around, I remember, this movie was described as like, the most trippy thing that he could possibly make and all that stuff. And I thought, oh, come on. Again, the guy that gave us Interstellar and Inception and all that stuff, how trippy could it possibly be? And I was not prepared for the level of trip that I took back in 2020 when I saw it in theaters, nor was I prepared for it really any more so when I revisited the movie now in 2026. And I've only seen the movie twice. Once in 2020 when it first came out, and now in 2026. So it's been 6 years in between my viewings of Tenet. And that is because, simply for the fact that this is one of the Christopher Nolan movies that I frankly just don't really care for. Like, Memento, I think, is a tough watch from a standpoint of it. I think that's kind of convoluted. Though, as I said in my review of Memento, I think the more I watch that, the more I'll understand it. And perhaps Tenet is the same way, and there even is truth to that statement because I did understand it more than I did the first time. But the difference between Memento and Tenet is that there's 20 years worth of filmmaking, 20 years worth of frankly being on the job, and with that comes experience. So when it came to something like Tenet, which has shades of everything Nolan likes. You know, time is malleable. In his movies, he likes a sprawling epic, a large cast. Complicated systems of telling a story. It's got all the trimmings of a Nolan movie. Yet this one just gets buried under its own weight. And I remember, when I was watching Tenet for the first time in the theater, there was literally a point where I had completely lost the narrative thread of the movie. And I was truly, legitimately just watching the movie. I was not experiencing it. And I've heard this phraseology before regarding movies. Oh, Transformers is something you can just turn your brain off. Fast and Furious, you can just turn your brain off. You're just meant to watch it. It's just popcorn fun. And I get that to a point, but I'm someone who I can never truly turn my brain off and just quote unquote watch something. Even something like Transformers, yes, it's over the top, it's loud, it's bombastic. There is still a plot there. There's still a story there. Even something like The Fast and Furious. Yes, there are still, plot points and story elements and all that stuff. And it often does get lost in action and all that stuff. Tenet also has its own story to tell with, beat by beat, ABC 1, 2, 3. But I mean this sincerely. I got completely lost in Tenet, and I truly was just watching it. And again, kind of the log line of the movie, I think the thing that is going to be written on Tenet's tombstone is don't try to understand it, feel it. That's a literal line of dialogue that is conveyed to the protagonist in the movie when they are explaining the systems of Tenet in the actual movie itself. Because in Tenet, there's this thing that has to do with time inversion, entropy reversing. So certain objects that exist in the world of the movie are reversed, essentially. They're going backwards in time. So one of the elements utilized is a gun. Okay, well, when you fire a gun, in the real world, the bullet fires forward, the casing gets ejected, so on and so forth. That's how a firearm works. In Tenet, you're not firing the bullet as described in the movie. You're catching it. So you are retrieving the bullet from its impact point back into the chamber. So that way, if someone were standing in the path of that inverted bullet, they'd be getting shot with a bullet in reverse. A really cool thing in terms of like an idea. On paper, this movie's awesome, but I did not understand the physics of how that would work when I was watching the movie in 2020. I was like, well, like if something exists in the future, then how does that affect someone in the present? Like, if they, like if they're, how is there any consequence to combat being fought in reverse? Can't you just simply dodge it? Or it's like, is everything meant to be a surprise sneak attack to where you don't know where this bullet's going to come flying from, and you're just going to be even more confused because it's going to be traveling in reverse? Like there are things like that that get expanded upon, inverting cars and people and all this other stuff. And I remember the more I tried to literally follow the the technology and the analysis of the trimmings of Tenet in the movie in 2020, I could not understand it. And so I just sat back and I watched beautiful imagery on screen, and I tried to follow the dialogue, which is another thing too. Christopher Nolan has a very unique sense of audio mixing, and I remember when I was watching Tenet in the theater with my mom, shout out my mom, uh, I there were parts of the movie I just frankly could not hear because the background noise was louder than the dialogue being spoken. There's one part in particular where people are on these fancy sailboats, and they literally have headsets on so they can communicate with one another, just sitting in the boat. They're shoulder to shoulder, yet they still need headsets. It's like when you're flying in an airplane or a helicopter. Sometimes you need, a headset to get over the sound of the engine and all that stuff. And again, with a movie, yes, Christopher Nolan wants to do stuff for real. He wants to try to get stuff practically, and there's a big, the way he shoots movies is very lauded for that because he does try to do things real and differently. Apparently, that extends to the audio capturing as well, because in the same way you would hear muddled dialogue if you were actually on that boat trying to speak through headsets to one another. That's how it was perceived to me in the audience, to where I was like, what is this? This sounds both close and far away, and I can hear the waves more than I can hear the audio. And with Tenet, with all Christopher Nolan movies, his plots and devices and writing is dense. It is, you have to follow it. Like if you cannot keep up, you're going to get lost. And in Tenet, where so much is conveyed so fast and in such a snappy way, I mean, if you lose one thing, you're lost. And that was me in 2020, and I left the theater going, what the heck was that? And I was just I I could not appreciate Tenet because I truly couldn't understand it from a plot progression, from an audio listening progression. I could not get Tenet at all. And so I left the theater with having virtually no desire to rewatch it. And frankly, if I wasn't doing this analysis of Nolan's filmography leading up to the Odyssey, I probably wouldn't have rewatched Tenet ever again. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad movie, because again, I don't necessarily think that it is. I just think it's so complicated to the point to where it can't be enjoyed. Well, fast forward now to 2026. Despite me saying that, I did enjoy it more the second time around, but not by a lot, because thankfully, getting to watch it in my own home where I can pause the movie at times, that's what I had to do. I was constantly pausing the movie and Googling things about Tenet. I was literally having to pause and look up stuff online about how does this work, and wait, what does this mean? What was that? Yada yada. And this movie sincerely felt like homework. Even now, after all these years and having hindsight and all that stuff, and having expectations be as low as they were going back into the movie, it still was just this meal for the mind, to the point to where I could not enjoy it. Inception is a meal for the mind, but I can understand it. Same with Interstellar, same with The Prestige and all that stuff. With Tenet, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me. But both times throughout watching the movie, I thought, like, I think I'm still kind of lost. I'm less lost than I was in 2020, but I'm still not fully getting it. However, I'll say this, though. I get it more. And because of that reason, I found more entertainment this time around. I kind of understood things and I was able to follow the dialogue. Thank God for subtitles, but like, if you're someone who doesn't care for subtitles, or again, if you saw it in the theater, uh, again, you're gonna have to pay extra close attention. But now, getting a sense of how Tenet actually works as a movie and the devices and stuff like that, I think a lot of this is based on perception because the movie it does have to do with congruent timelines running at the same time, and so there are points where you'll see stuff going forward in time, then you'll see stuff later in the movie that is going backwards in time. And visually, it is cool when you're watching you're watching characters who are inverted through different points in time fighting each other. So a man moving forward in time is fighting someone moving backwards in time, for example. Really cool idea. Again, on paper, this movie is a banger. But again, the more I thought about it, I thought, well, how is there any conflict to these events? But then again, the more I kind of tried to understand Tenet, even though the movie said, don't try to understand it, feel it. No, I wanted to understand it. The more I tried to digest it, I think a lot of Tenet is based on perception because I was able to grasp more this time that, you know, for people moving forward in time, they're going to see someone who is inverted moving backwards in time. So that to them is going to look weird. On the flip side, the person who is inverted will see the world move around them backwards as well. So it is truly based on perception. Sometimes the person will appear going backwards, sometimes the world around them will appear going backwards. And again, the movie does set up the premise. I don't know if they fully explain it or not in the movie. I frankly might have just missed it, but I think the movie is meant to explain that the story is happening at the same time. The movie itself is happening at the same time, both forwards and backwards. And we as the audience are jumping in and out of those timelines. Again, it's confusing. The editing in this movie is superb in the sense that it does the legwork of trying to convey where you are, both in terms of what timeline and where on the timeline specifically. And then you throw in the wrenches of like, oh my gosh, well our plan didn't work and we need to pivot. So when a different plot element comes in, you're trying to follow this as well. There's a lot of branching timelines. And honestly, when it comes to something like this movie, I do think that an examination afterwards is going to be required. People who watch the Terminator movies, for example, they love to break down the actual timelines of how their time travel works and the paradoxes and all that stuff. Tenet is the same way. Tenet, you could easily spend a couple hours, watching, video analysis on the movie or trying to, write out stuff like that. But like, is that really what you want from a movie? Like, do you want to have to try to study and review its own way of telling its story? Like, there is fun dissection to have when it comes to something like Terminator, trying to understand what it fully means for the story. There's a difference when you're trying to dissect Tenet because you're trying to literally understand its story. Tenet is just outright confusing. I think Christopher Nolan started to tell a story and use devices that were too big for his britches, frankly. This isn't your traditional time travel, and stuff like that. It is a wonky movie. That being said, though, again, despite me kind of taking this movie to task here, I did enjoy it more the second time around. I understood more. I found the action more enjoyable. I was able to understand the dialogue more, paying extra close attention. And again, subtitles help me. So I got that stuff too. The cast is great. John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, the works. And oh, the music in question, by the way. Whereas editing does one portion of the heavy lifting for Tenet, so does the music. I found the score to be remarkable. This is another example of music I think that is so good you can listen to it outside of watching the movie. It is that good. It's trippy and futuristic, has a really good sense of rhythm and beat to it. I really picked up on the musical cues this time around. Really enjoyed the music of Tenet. But yeah, so has Tenet aged better overall? I think so, but it's one of the two Nolan movies that I can sadly but confidently say like I disliked it. And again, I think Memento for myself is due for another bite at the apple. And again, that is one of Nolan's first movies. To many, that is considered to be his first movie. Again, he did Following, but I digress on that one. But again, Tenet is much later in his tenure, and you think he'd kind of get this stuff down. Again, this is a dense movie. I'm not asking for everything to be Transformers or Fast and Furious. No, I like The Prestige. I like Interstellar. I like stuff like that. But Tenet, I think tries to do too much, and it just gets weighed down. Christopher Nolan has said that he made this movie as kind of an ode to the spy genre, and I get that more now. But again, in the moment of actually watching it, if you're not invested in the story because you can't understand it, then you're not going to be able to appreciate the cool dialogue, the cool action, the cool locations, the cool costumes, the love letters to the spy genre of like James Bond, and so on and so forth. But again, this is Nolan's universe. This is his thing. He loves to use time as a tool in the toolbox, and when it comes to Tenet, this is kind of him diving in deep into that realm, you know. And he asks a lot of the audience. He asks us to be able to understand and perceive him, but I think that a lot of it does get lost in its own execution. And so I found Tenet to be still confusing, but less confusing this time and more enjoyable, but not overall very enjoyable. Like if someone said, "Hey, we're gonna watch a movie. We're thinking about doing Nolan. You get to pick. I'm not picking Tenet, you know." And if someone said, "Hey, you want to come over? We're watching Tenet," I'd be like, "Ugh, I don't know." But again, that being said, if you're able to watch this movie with people who maybe are able to help you grasp what's going on, then cool. Maybe this could be maybe this movie's meant to be a cool conversation piece, because you can talk a lot about Nolan's movies. You can talk about Interstellar and Inception and all this stuff for days on end. Same with Tenet. I do think that there is fun to be had in this movie and around this movie. But again, it in my opinion, it is entirely uphill. So yeah, so when it comes to Tenet, your mileage may vary if you choose to watch this movie, and if you do, um, yeah, it's a lot. So just prepare to, frankly, get lost. Maybe you have to back things up because I sure did, and yeah. Oh, and another thing I forgot to mention off the top. I don't mean to retread a point here, but like the movie doesn't explain its own, like it doesn't. Tenet never fully explains what the enemy wants until like after the halfway mark of the movie. So there are points where you're just like, I'm not fully understanding like what's going on here. Again, I should have made that point earlier, but yeah, like I noticed when it's finally when the exposition is given, bad guy wants to do bad thing for this reason. It's like, okay, great, but we're already 90 minutes into it. It's like, what are we doing here? So again, there are certain priorities put on this movie to, for example, show the actual time inversion aspect of the movie, yet then they don't really explain fully why this is happening or what's happening, yada yada, until much later. And at that point, again, I was lost. But then when they finally played catch up with the audience, there was a point where I went, "Oh, okay, I get it." But again, that was right around the halfway mark, maybe even a little more for the halfway mark. So really, when it came to Tenet, again, for about half of it, I was like, "What is this? I think I know what this is, but like, what is it?" And then there came a point of clarity. So then, thankfully, the third act kind of, you know, fell into place pretty cleanly. But yeah, the juice was not necessarily worth the squeeze on this one. So yeah, but hey, look, if you're someone out there who loves Tenet and thinks it's Nolan's best, or maybe it's your favorite movie ever, that's fantastic. Like good for you for being able to understand this way more than I certainly could. But yeah, for someone who really enjoys Nolan's catalog, and again, I mean this humbly, not in a braggadocious way. I was able to get Inception the first go around. When it comes to Tenet, I'm now two goes at it in, and I still don't fully get it. So maybe the third time is my charm. But yeah. Anyway, That'll do it for my review of Tenet. I have one left now, leading up to the release of the Odyssey, that being Oppenheimer. And so I will talk to you guys again once I'm done doing my rewatch of that one. All right, stay tuned. Kids, welcome back to the Far Out Podcast. At the time of this recording, it is now July 11th, and I have just finished Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, the last movie he did before the Odyssey releases into theaters later this month. And the word I would use to describe Oppenheimer is breathtaking. I found this movie to be remarkable. I remember I found it to be that way when I first saw it in the theater back in 2023. I saw it 3 times in the theater, actually, that year. And since then, I have not watched it. I've seen clips, I've had discussions about it. It's kind of been in the back of my mind when Nolan has been brought up, but I haven't seen it in its entirety. Again, since I saw it in the theater. So now, 3 years later, getting to see it again via my Blu-ray. Shout out to physical media. You guys got to buy that every now and then. But yeah, getting to revisit the film, it's astounding. It's incredible, and it's not as flashy as Nolan's Batman movies, or Inception or Interstellar. This is it's a period piece. It's frankly a biography on Robert Oppenheimer, but it's also a courtroom drama. It's a slice of history. It's something that's a love letter to science, but it is so curiously crafted in the way it portrays how governments work, how people inside governments work, the just the underhandedness of it all. It's crazy, and that's an aspect of it that I had forgotten. It's something that when you think of the Manhattan Project, you'll probably think of Dr. Oppenheimer, but then you'll probably think of just the explosions, the tests and the use of the bombs back in World War II. Well, you know, I didn't know this frankly until the movie, but there was all this scrutiny about Oppenheimer, both before, during, and after the Manhattan Project, about his affiliations to the Communist Party, and his loyalty to America was subject to question, and there was all this cross examination from colleagues, past and present, and all that stuff, and stuff with our military and all that stuff. I had no idea there were layers to this. I frankly thought that after World War II, after the Manhattan Project was deemed a success, I thought that everyone involved just rode off into the sunset. But there wasn't. Everything was left up to examination, and that's what this movie is about. We're getting to see the examination of Oppenheimer's life, his work, his affiliations, and those around him as well. And this movie is a feast of dialogue, of acting, a remarkable cast led by Cillian Murphy, but then you've got Matt Damon in there, you've got Dane DeHaan in there, Casey Affleck, Emily Blunt, so many great actors and actresses alike. Just again, really chewing the scenery with all this stuff, and the way this thing is captured, it really is just this slice of life taken over the course of several decades. Yes, but it really captures you in the story and in its progress. Whereas I mentioned previously how I felt that Tenet got too weighed down, too heavy by um, its own sense of story and the way it wanted it to tell itself. Oppenheimer is certainly a return to form. It's in a world where you might not have liked Tenet, for example, Oppenheimer is a return to form, because this is Nolan weaving an intricate web, again utilizing time as a tool in the toolbox. Yet this one lands the plane in every metric. It's entertaining. At times it's fun. At times it's devastating. It is interesting, and it keeps you glued to the screen. You're on the edge of your seat, and they make all this stuff just so interesting. And I found it really. I frankly found it awesome just to rewatch this movie and to see all the layers to this. Uh, but from a literal technical process of making this, I thought that the use of, once again, practical effects were great. Loved the costumes. Thought the music was exquisite. The color grading and all this stuff. It looks remarkable. The cinematography is amazing. My quibbles with the movie are one, the actual explosion itself, the detonation of the nuclear device when they are testing it. Uh, little little just a smidge underwhelming. I actually thought it was more underwhelming when I saw it in the theater. Now again, being years later and rewatching the movie and getting to see that whole scene play out, I found it more, you know, I thought it had more power behind it. Whereas the first time I saw it, I thought, oh, like that's it. Like again, you're kind of working and building up to that moment. That's not the singular moment of the movie. In fact, it's really funny to say this. The actual test itself isn't. It's not the crown of the movie. That's not the apex of it. The apex again continues to follow Oppenheimer before, during, and after the test. But the actual test itself, when this is meant to be a visual spectacle, I thought it left a little bit to be desired in the theater. And now upon this rewatch, getting to see it on my personal TV, that's the best I thought it looked. Again, just again after years have passed, and now getting to see it again, I thought, oh, okay, that's a little more of how I'd want the explosion to be representative, or represented in the movie. Excuse me. I do wish it was like literally bigger. I wish the scene was a little longer, but otherwise, I think kind of the subtlety of it is maybe more of an artistic decision. I don't. It's not like Nolan, I think, got a bad take or anything. I think he was just trying to accent the point that the explosion itself, the test firing, is not, as I said, the apex of the movie. That's really more just you know, um, a single step in the movie itself, which perhaps. But the other aspect I found to be a little kind of puzzling. Again, just quibbles in an otherwise excellent movie. Was I had not realized the amount of editing done in terms of aspect ratios. There's the standard aspect ratio, the numbers of which the actual alignment itself is eluding me at this point. But whenever you watch a movie, you got the black bars on on the top and on the bottom. That's what the majority of the movie is shot and shown in. Yet I know, Nolan loves IMAX, and so for certain sequences of the movie, the aspect ratio actually changed from the the standard format into IMAX, so that the rest of the screen got filled in. And lots of movies do that. I mean, lots of Nolan movies have done that. Mission Impossible has done that before. First Man, directed by Damien Chazelle, has done that before. And you kind of that IMAX is more so reserved for big, impactful, really serious moments in the movie. I remember again from one of the Mission Impossibles. That's when Tom Cruise is flying a helicopter, and then with First Man, it's when Ryan Gosling lands on the moon. For Oppenheimer, there are several sequences cut throughout the movie that have the expanded aspect ratio into the IMAX resolution. But I found their inclusions to be a lot more than I intended and remembered, and I also found their inclusions to be a bit jarring, if I'm being honest. Sometimes the aspect ratio changed to the IMAX presentation for literally less than 5 seconds. They would just do an insert shot of like a building or like a dinner table, and it would last again 2, 3, 4 seconds. So it'd go one to one aspect ratio with the black bars to IMAX, no black bars, then back to black bars in the span of 8 seconds. And I gotta be honest, I found it a little jarring. I appreciated the IMAX, framing when it was there. You literally get to see more of the screen, and that's great. Who doesn't want to see more of the movie they're watching? But I found it just kind of jarring, whereas again before those previous movies I mentioned, Mission Impossible and First Man respectively, those sequences are several minutes, so you have time to get in sit in the IMAX resolution, then get out and go on. Whereas Nolan or Oppenheimer, Nolan chose to just start and stop the IMAX pretty much seemingly at will. And again, that's perhaps another creative decision and whatnot. And as I said, I'm not knocking the IMAX, capturing. Again, I think it looks great, via my Blu-ray. But again, I found it jarring. There were points where I noticed the aspect ratio changing, and it took me out of the movie just a little bit. But that might be more of a technical thing than anything. But besides that, I think Oppenheimer is a remarkable piece of filmmaking. If someone said this is their favorite Nolan movie, I'd get it. I would completely get it. If someone said, hey, come over, we're gonna watch Oppenheimer, I'd be like, sign me up. Like we're gonna have a real meal here of a movie. And I just found it to be incredible. And if you're a fan of history, period pieces, remarkable acting, this movie is superb. It's really, really great. And so, as I bring this episode to a close now, talking about Nolan, excluding following and his Dark Knight trilogy, if I had to rank the Christopher Nolan movies that I've seen now, I think I would do. Oh boy, let me see here. I'm doing this in real time. I think I would do Memento, then Tenet, then Insomnia, then Dunkirk, then Inception, then The Prestige, then Oppenheimer, then Interstellar. I think that's how I would do it. Yeah, again, just kind of going off the dome here. I I had forgotten how good Interstellar was, and so that one takes the number one spot for me. And again, Tenet kind of got elevated a little bit here in the years forward, but yeah, Oppenheimer is a remarkable piece of filmmaking, and also Dunkirk, getting to revisit that one again. So yeah, I would do, again, just in recap, I would do Memento, Insomnia, no, Memento, then Tenet, then Insomnia, Dunkirk, Inception, The Prestige, Oppenheimer, Interstellar. That's how I would do it. So yeah, and then regarding where the Dark Knight trilogy falls in there, I mean that's kind of in its own different category. But again, of the movies I watched for this episode, that's my ranking of Nolan's filmography. And so yeah, kids, that'll do it for this episode of the Far Out Podcast. Thank you for watching and for listening and for in a way enduring. As I said, this episode took me several months to record and complete, which was not my intention, but this whole process started in February and finished in July, which again, I was not intending to do that. But better late than never. But yeah, again, at the time of this recording, it being July 11th, Oppenheimer, the Odyssey is less than a week away. It releases on July 17th. That's when it goes wide to the masses here. So we are in striking distance of more Christopher Nolan. But yeah, this has been a fun exploration for me and just a fun thing to do. It's been a while since I've seen a lot of these movies, and I'm very happy that I did, even for the ones I did not particularly care for. But Christopher Nolan he's a filmmaker's filmmaker. He's one of the best to do it, and I'm very thankful to be, just in this current position in time, pun intended, where he's making movies and I get to, anticipate them and review them and all that stuff. And yeah, I think that his movies age like wine. I think you can pick them up years later, just like I did. And so if you have not seen any of these movies in quite some time, I recommend that you do so. Yeah, you should rewatch them. And if you haven't seen any of them before at all, I think you should treat yourself and dive into Christopher Nolan. If you're a fan of movies, much like myself, again, as I've said, he's one of the best to do it in the game right now. And so I think you should just treat yourself to a fun outing, with a movie or two every now and then. He's got a great, diverse list of stories he's told. And so, yeah, he's great. But yeah, again, thank you for watching and for listening. And then I will see you at the movies when we're all watching the Odyssey together. All right. Bye-bye.